Not only did the fraudsters, the story continued podcast gain subscribers, Carla Daniels began to be followed by people higher up the hierarchy, and she sold some of her material and research to TMZ, which used its vast resources to conduct a deeper investigation. What began as complaints from a disgruntled man turned into a full-blown investigation into corruption and exploitation in Paranaque, Texas. We'll realize the pain down. There had become unbearable when he was served with defamation lawsuits and cease and desist orders. He laughed, called Barry, and Barry called his lawyer, whom he kept on retainer. The lawyer asked Will to come to his firm's office, located in one of the glass towers that obscured the once immaculate view of the Capitol at his earliest convenience. He and Woody made an appointment, put on their best but completely inadequate clothes, and called an Uber downtown. Their young lawyer, James Savage, came across as confident, almost self-assured, but his belief that he would simply destroy the plaintiff's claims was convincing and reassuring. Of course, he stipulated that they must be completely honest and frank in all interviews with him in order to avoid unpleasant revelations in the process of disclosing evidence. He also insisted that they not answer questions from the media if they related to the subjects of the litigation. They agreed and were informed of the requirements to prove libel under Texas law. 3 conditions. It must be proven that the defendant made a false statement or statement of fact to a third party, made a statement that caused reputational or material harm to the plaintiff, and acted either negligently or intentionally. I'm very familiar with your songs, Mr. Callahan. Having been to Maggie Meese, Scoot In, and Mavericks, as you might have guessed, I'm a fan of yours. I also watched Miss Daniels' podcast and the TMZ report. Their legal counsel is either ignorant of the facts that led to your divorce or has been misled. If they can somehow prove that the songs are about them, that you knowingly made false statements or statements to a third party, in this case, the world, and that those statements caused the plaintiff's reputational or financial harm, they will win. However, they have many problems, and they start with the disclosure of evidence. I assume you want me to interview anyone who has the facts regarding this case. If so, I'll need names and contact information for everyone. Once you have completed your list, I will meet with you to get a summary of what they may have, assuming that the songs you recorded for the album are autobiographical and that Miss Daniels' research is reliable. I have no doubt that we will pass the first test. By the time the trial begins, we will also know what TMZ found and what we learned during the investigation, which will likely save us from having to do the in-depth investigations that we would otherwise have to do. Oh, we'll run some investigations, but that's not necessary, Mr. Savage. I hired investigators almost 3 weeks ago. My friends helped them infiltrate the community, and they have been collecting information ever since. Their first report will be ready next week. Not only are you a great songwriter, Mr. Callahan, but you're also a great client. I think you foresaw this lawsuit. Yes, but more importantly, I want proof that the court was and is corrupt. The social worker lied, and the sheriff is as unscrupulous as the judge and the rest of the Smithman family. Most importantly, I want proof that they are neglecting my children because I want full custody when the truth comes out. Oh, I see. In this case, I will stop wasting time and immediately engage our family law attorney so that we can develop our strategy to achieve these goals. He rang the bell, and a few minutes later, a striking young Latina walked in. Will, let me introduce you to Drusilla Rodriguez, Drew, from our family law practice. Based on my conversation with your manager, I have provided her with a brief description of your situation. She's also a fan of your music, and she's from Laredo, so she knows and understands Cowtown. I believe she is the perfect representative for you. Woody, come next door with me. We'll drink coffee and talk while they talk. Sometimes you just feel connected to people. And by the time they found mutual friends and Drew shared what she knew about his hometown, they were connected. When she brought the others back, an hour later they were best friends, and Drew, a closeted human rights activist, had a case she was willing to fight for. Drew and James held a 10-minute meeting in the next room, after which James turned to Will. If I may guess, we understand that your goals are as follows: to lift the restraining order prohibiting you from seeing your children, Ensure compliance with your parental right to communicate with your children, and respond promptly to a libel claim as it may affect the performance of your songs. These are certainly priorities, but I have something else. Can we file a separate lawsuit to restore my parents' rights to communicate with their grandchildren? They have been denied access since this mess started so long ago. I'm sure Mrs. Rodriguez will take care of this first, James answered. Just so you don't get bored, Mr. Savage, would you like to countersue for the damage to my reputation caused by their lies, especially the lies that I hurt my children and wife? Also, feel free to add anything else that you think might hurt them. I now have enough money to do what I should have done right away, but couldn't afford. Savage had been keeping a low profile so far, but his wide smile and the nature of his response convinced Will and Woody that he was the great white shark Barry was talking about. You make me very, very happy. You may already be my favorite client ever, and we're just getting started. We can coordinate cases, and this will make the discovery of evidence even more interesting. We will include Drew's attorney's fees because their lies caused you to lose your parental rights. With a serious face, Drusilla warned, "You're lucky she filed for divorce when she did, and that the judge approved it so quickly. If what I see in this case is correct, your financial situation has changed significantly. Given the obvious greed in the original lawsuit, I am sure that they will want to reconsider the division of property and support for your ex-wife. At least child support will be tense. 2 things. Firstly, I had no idea then that our music would find an audience, not to mention that it would bring us millions in sponsorship and advertising, merchandise, sales, and income from concerts at large venues to which we are invited. Secondly, I will do anything for my children and provide them with everything, but their mother and her lover deserve nothing and will receive nothing. Don't worry, Will. These people are big fish in their own little pond, but we swam with sharks in Westlake and Lakeway. We will protect you, but they have no idea what awaits them." Buoyed by Drusilla's confidence and assurance that he would spend Christmas with the children, this year will spend another considerable sum buying Andrew and Carolyn gifts for the birthdays he missed due to the restraining order and Christmas gifts his children told him about. Through your sources, the studio was booked for 2 weeks to record their second album when Will made an offer that surprised the others. Guys, our first album received a lot of acclaim, and I firmly believe that we need several songs about the human condition on every album. Having said that, I'd like to take a look at some of Lena's blues songs and Leela's Appalachian folk and bluegrass. We don't need covers, and we need to distribute my protest songs. I think our second and third albums should be as authentic as the first, but more varied. We have too many talented musicians not to explore different genres, and I truly believe that the songwriters among us can write lyrics to any arrangement we come up with. I was listening to Leela's audition tapes again the other day when she went to bed early, and there are real treasures in there. It inspired me to listen more closely to what Leela gave us. And boy, these girls are not only great singers and musicians, but also first-class songwriters. I spoke my mind on our first album, and I can't express how grateful I am to you guys for supporting me and letting me speak. I'm not done yet. I still have a lot on my mind, but our girls want to speak. Up to. I know Gary and Danny have their own thoughts and music too. Leela and I will help you express them if you agree to challenge us musically and make our group better. As for you, Woody, my friend, I think you and I need to start working on a song or two about trying to force the soul of a country singer into skinny jeans and hip-hop pop music and the power of real friendship that saves lost souls. Barry nearly fainted when he received a slightly altered list of songs for the BGH Pundits Unfettered, but after he and their producer listened to the latest rehearsal tapes, they enthusiastically began preparing the studio. As before, their practice of perfect playing meant they only spent a few days in the studio. Gary, Leela, and Leela then did their thing, adding various instruments, and the final products showcased the band's musical prowess as much as the lyrics, seeing their Grammy-winning producer's enthusiasm as they listened to the final cuts of the album was gratifying, and they were receptive to his suggestions for videos for several of their more soulful songs. Barry's media-savvy kids were also full of ideas, and the weeks leading up to Thanksgiving were as busy producing video clips as the previous months were recording music. Meanwhile, Savage and Rodriguez tormented those about whom the songs were written on the first album. After filing a motion to lift the injunction and a custodial claim, Drew filed a motion to recuse the judge from all cases involving persons with whom he has a personal, family, or familial relationship. She also wrote letters to the Texas State Board of Social Workers and the Department of Human Services, demanding that a new caseworker be assigned who is not a relative or friend of the children's mother, and that the new employee immediately interview the children, separately from the parents. At the same time, Savage filed lawsuits against Sarah and Donnie for libel and defamation of William Andrew Callahan, as well as against the sheriff and the social worker for tampering with evidence and making false statements in the case. He also filed motions to recuse the judge due to his long-standing personal, family, and family ties to the defendants. Will finally gave his phone number to Timbo and Sierra, and they talked to him a lot, talking about the aftermath of the lawsuits and the storm that followed them. Until now, no one had dared to challenge the plutocracy that ruled their small town and country. But the members of this wealthy cabal suddenly found themselves under serious siege. Based on observations and interactions, the common folk described Donnie and his father as irritated to the point of rage, Sarah and her parents as puzzled and worried, and other key players as worried and worried. These messages made Will and Woody excited and full of energy. Many a glass of beer was toasted to their fellow cowtowners in local bars, and their music played non-stop from jukeboxes and cars with open windows and loud music. Long-standing grievances against those who mistreated the citizens suddenly flared up like a geyser in an oil field, and being on the streets became an unpleasant experience for the Smith-Armons, their families, friends, and minions. The group spent Thanksgiving at a ranch near Tilden, but only had to provide 3 roast turkeys and a cold beer for the afternoon competition. Additional turkeys with trimmings and countless desserts were provided by their guests from Cowtown, who arrived at 10 meters with their children. By noon, the turkeys were done. Everything that needed to be reheated was heated, and there was a feast waiting on the table and stove. The younger children went first, followed by the older children and adults. Woody invited Lena and Leela to go with children their size, but they refused showing him obscene gestures. Before everyone took their seats in the dining room or on the terrace outside, Paco stood up and addressed those present. As you know, I come from a very poor family. Well, most of you do too, so you'll understand. Our family tradition. We didn't have much, but we were grateful for what we had. So I ask everyone to name one thing, just one thing, for which he or she is grateful this Thanksgiving. And that, everyone responds, Amen. We'll start with the kids and work our way around. The answers varied and some were complex, but Will's answer was simple. I'm grateful for all the people in my life who care about me. Cornhole and horseshoe tournaments took place in the courtyard all day with junior, novice, and open categories. The Dallas Cowboys Thanksgiving Day game was on TV, but little attention was paid to it. Many complained that the traditional game between the Texas Longhorns and Aggies disappeared after the University of Texas moved to the SEC, after which they disappeared in the Western Division, and the Texas Longhorns changed coaches several times without returning to the status of a top-tier team as in the first decade of the new century. In the evening, we ate turkey sandwiches on homemade bread again, after which an acoustic concert was held. The Bandits played all the songs from the album and several that were planned for their third album, which will be released in early spring. They carefully monitored their friends' reactions to new songs, remembering that they were always excellent predictors of future success. They also performed other favorite songs on request, including every song from Human Condition, followed by a lively and humorous exchange of news about what was happening in their hometown. At 10:30, by general agreement, the celebration ended. Everyone said goodbye. The Cowtown guests left for the West, and the minstrels put away their instruments and went to a long, deserved rest. Although Lila and Will were up early, they were the last to arrive for breakfast, and they ignored the banter in favor of an important announcement. Leela Leela and I finished 3 of Leela's songs and 4 of Leela's songs. My contribution, so to speak, is in the lyrics, but they are responsible for the heart and soul of the lyrics and for all the arrangements. I'm sure you will all love them. After the initial burst of joy had subsided a little, he added, and I've written some new songs that I want you to arrange. Don't ask me when I had time, they just flew out of me. They're a little different, but I really like them. The openings began a little after 10 and ended a little before noon. Everyone unanimously agreed that these songs should be on the 3rd album, and that many, if not all of them, would become successful singles. Of course, they still needed work, and they did. Sitting on the terrace on a cool and clear November day. Eventually, they'll have to move into the garage to rehearse, but by then, all they'll have to do is polish the songs and add more instruments. The group worked exceptionally well together in the fresh air of South Texas. Perhaps it was because of the silence, perhaps because of the solitude, perhaps because they knew they were loved and appreciated for more than just their music here in the bush. Or perhaps they simply interacted better when they were relaxed. Will's troubles still intervened from time to time, but his lawyers were causing havoc 70 miles to the west. The first album's messages were heard and understood by a much wider audience than anticipated. The serfs of Cootown were in open rebellion, and the outside world began to encroach on the hell fief that their hometown had become. The tools were put away, and the first bottles of beer were opened when Will's phone rang. He looked at the screen, frowned, stood up, and entered the house. "What's going on, Dad?" he asked with obvious concern. "More than I can tell you right now, son. But I have 3 people here who want to talk to you. If you don't mind, you're on speakerphone, so..." "And who could it be?" he asked suspiciously. "Your ex-wife and your former relatives. I know you probably don't want to, but your mom and I think it would be smart." "Sorry, Dad, but I can't. Remember the restraining order. I have already enjoyed the hospitality of the old prison once. I don't intend to go back there a second time. Well, this is Al. Peggy and I are not covered by the warrant. Will you talk to us?" "Why should I, boss? You 2 abandoned me the moment the lies began. I can't think of any good reason to do you a favor. Besides, there's nothing you could say to make the past better or change my opinion about the lawsuits. We're just wasting air and minutes, son. I know, no tenderness. You lost that right when you supported your daughter. Your daughter who claimed that I harmed her and my children. She was outright lying. You 2 knew it, and you lied by not saying anything. But let me tell you this, Al, when I get full custody of the children, I will allow you and Peggy to come and see Mom and Dad on occasion for special events, which is more than your daughter did for my parents," Sarah screamed. "Will, please don't take my children." Nah. Remember the restraining order, Al? I can't and won't talk to anyone on the list." And that voice sounded too much like Sarah. He heard sobs and sniffles in the background. And then a voice said, "Dad, tell him I said and tell him I'll lift the restraining order as soon as I can so we can talk and he can see the kids." Al asked, "Did you hear that?" "No. I said I could not and would not communicate with anyone listed on the warrant. If you have something to say it. Otherwise, I'm leaving." "Fine." Sarah says, "No, I don't know if this is covered by the warrant or not, but I won't take the risk. You guys have already betrayed me several times, so I'm not going to take any chances. I understand Will. I ask you to reconsider your custody suit. Sarah may have done you wrong, but she is a good mother, and losing her children would kill her. Will snort it. She's a good mother, so she should get custody. Is that what I just heard?" "Nonsense. I was a better father than she was a mother, and she destroyed me without regret. She lied to get custody and deny me access to my children, and happily ruined my good name in the process. I have turned from Father of the Year into a tormentor of my wife and children, so don't try to play on my pity. I have 0. Besides, from what I have learned, there has been a lot of neglect and inattention in this house, dating back to the very beginning of her life with that jerk she got together with while we were still married. My investigators found evidence that my children were left with a nanny or nannies for an unacceptably long period of time. If this is true, perhaps she should think about a new man, and the sooner the better. The sobs became louder and more intermittent. Will listened in silence, enjoying their torment until it subsided and he heard Sarah talking to her mother. "Will, this is Peggy," she said, choking on sobs. "Is there anything that Sarah can do that we can do to improve the relationship between us? Have you listened to the album, Peggy?" "Yes, many times. And it breaks my heart." If songs break your heart, imagine how those events affected the songwriter. Do you think you can heal this broken heart? Do you think you can fix this? No. Then hand the phone back to your father. "Put the speakerphone away, Dad. I removed it, son." Don't give them false hopes. They brought this on themselves, them, the Smith-Armans, and their relatives. I love their daughter and tried to be a good worker. They thank me by trying to destroy me. Fuck her, fuck them, and fuck everyone who played a role in this. I'm going to destroy this whole damn company and no one, not them or anyone else, can stop me. If you suddenly feel weak, just remember that they also deprived you of the right to be a grandfather. I understand, Will, but believe me, son, the pain is widespread, it is deep, and there is more to this story than you know. One thing is for sure. No matter how the court cases end, this is a completely different community. Great, this is my goal. We'll talk to them a little more. I think Sarah now understands the depth of your anger, and she definitely sees that. Everything is coming back like a boomerang. We may be able to expedite your access to your children without waiting for trial, perhaps, but don't give them any promises from me, because I don't forgive, and I'm unforgiving. It's going to hurt, and this time it won't be me or my parents. Sarah did not have time to lift the restraining order. Will Sharks, the threat of judicial review and growing public pressure inspired Judge Smitherman to recuse himself from all cases involving his relatives by blood or marriage. The new judge was appointed from a list of reserve judges maintained by the state of Texas. He recently retired at age 62 after working in a nearby county. He was well aware of the goings-on in Cobar County long before Will's songs topped the charts, and he acted quickly once he got to work. By scheduling a preliminary hearing on Will's request to lift the restraining order, he ordered Child Protective Services to reopen the investigation and re-interview all witnesses. Faced with the subpoena, media attack, and mounting public anger over the album, Clara Jones, the social worker who determined Will was unfit to parent, resigned and went into hiding. The young woman who took her place at CPS wasted no time in immediately interviewing the children and their mother. The children repeated all the wonderful things they said about their father the first time they were interviewed. When asked about life without their father, they provided disturbing information about how they were treated by their new stepfather and how their mother had changed since she left their dad. When San Juan or Ortiz entered the interrogation room, Mom felt backed into a corner. This woman had known her since childhood, and Sarah wished she had treated her better earlier. San Juan was not a cousin. If she repeated her previous lies, the children, their close friends, their children's friends, and probably both sides of the parents would refute them. And San Juan would report it today. The new judge, who was not Uncle Donnie. If they prove that she lied under oath, Will undoubtedly receive full custody, and she will end up in the same position she put him, into private of contact with the children and facing jail time if she continued to lie, and Will still won. She knew that he would retaliate and not allow her to have contact with the children. Well, no matter what you do, it will still be bad, she thought. She hesitated for a long time, fussing and prevaricating, until the social worker got tired of her empty words and asked directly, "Are you withdrawing your previous statement, Mrs. Smitherman? Because I don't hear any accusations of physical, mental, and emotional abuse in your words, unlike your previous statement." She tried to change tactics. It was a very difficult time. I was torn between my old and new loves and was taking medications to control my anxiety, and these medications kept me in a state of confusion. I don't remember much of the interview where I allegedly made these accusations, but I do remember being told to just answer yes or no, and Donnie nodding his head to indicate how I should answer. Let me clarify, Mrs. Smitherman. At this point, without the influence of confusing medications or extraneous guidance, please describe times when your ex-husband, William Callahan, physically harmed you or your children. Before you answer, I must warn you that I have access to hospital and medical records and will verify your statements. Sarah pretended to think deeply about the question, but in reality, she was considering which answer would be the least dangerous for her. Finally, she gave in. I don't know how Clara came to this conclusion, but I don't remember Will ever laying a hand on me or the children. Mrs. Ortiz signed. Then please describe the moments and circumstances in which Mr. Callahan emotionally and psychologically tormented you or your children, as alleged in your previous interview with Clara Jones. Sarah thought again about how best to cover up her past lies, and again settled on the alibi of entanglement and control by Donnie and Clara. Mrs. Ortiz knew Sarah and Will their entire lives and was the mother of 3 children herself, the eldest of whom Will coached in baseball. Sarah noted that she did not seem convinced or sympathetic. I've known you all my life, Sarah, Mrs. Smitherman, and it's hard for me to imagine you as a confused, depressed woman whose response is controlled by her lover. You have always been a cunning, strong woman who planned everything down to the smallest detail. Do you want to try again? That is, do you want to add anything to this statement? After all, you are absolving your ex-husband of any wrongdoing. Is that your intention? With a hint of challenge on her pretty face and a sparkle in her eyes, Sarah replied, No, I have nothing to add. I told you everything I remember now. Sanjuana Ortiz stood up, shook hands with the deceitful woman in front of her, gave her a quick glance with contempt hidden behind a false smile, and said, The judge asked me to report my findings to him as soon as my report is ready. It will happen tomorrow at 10. If you would like to add or change anything, please let me know before 8 a.m. Otherwise, we'll see you in court. The last was said with an accent, and Sarah knew what it meant. She will lose her children and possibly be charged with making false statements about domestic violence. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad if we got kids, Sarah thought. As Donnie became more involved in politics, they became more socially active at the local and state levels, which meant often leaving the children for long periods of time with their parents. They were happy to spend time with their grandchildren, but complained that her absences had become so frequent and prolonged that they bordered on neglect. It made her feel guilty, but not enough to stop her from going to all the fun events with Donnie, so she found a few babysitters who would stay the night, or even 2 days if they were paid well. She knew they didn't do much other than babysit the kids and feed them. Fast food that they ordered home, but what was worse, they clearly didn't mind spreading rumors. Well, Will has always been the best parent, she reminded herself with a sigh, and he'll have both sets of grandparents to help take care of the kids when he's on tour. My parents respect and love him more than they love me, and I know that he will bring them back into his life sooner or later. Donnie isn't particularly happy raising Will's kids, so he'll be happy if they stay with Will. I'll miss them, but I'll have more time to travel with Donnie, so that will balance things out. She had not yet realized that their social invitations had begun to fade as quickly as Donnie's political ambitions, indicating that Sarah was living in a world of illusion. She was not the only one living in this fairy tale world. The powers that be in cities and districts also lived. They are confident that they were protected from external influences. Justice and justice. But then an unknown group releases an album, shoots videos, and suddenly the autumn wind throws off all the leaves from the trees on which they were calmly sitting, revealing their power. And so karma found them. Sheriff Alderman already has an opponent in the March primary. He was a local guy named Juan Garcia, who had recently retired after 20 years of service in the Army Military Police. He completed 3 combat tours and then returned home to care for his aging parents. Everyone knew that the song Leo was about a corrupt sheriff and several of his deputies. It was also known that Juan would win the election by a landslide. The 65-year-old judge also faces a challenger in the upcoming elections. She was a local woman who received her bachelor's degree from Texas A&M and her law degree from the University of Texas. She has 9 years of experience as an assistant district attorney in San Antonio and 8 years of private practice in Pleasanton. She was married to a general practitioner who also worked in Pleasanton. They had 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. All children were excellent students and athletes, receiving multiple awards, including participation in district and state competitions for academic and athletic achievements. With the judicial district covering both Atascosa and Coe counties, Judge Smitherman's chances for re-election looked bleak. Candidate Sylvia Cardenas would easily win in the populous Atascosa County where she lived, and with growing animosity toward the Smitherman family, and news that Sylvia and her husband were buying a ranch west of Cowtown, she would easily gain support in Coe County as well. The corrupt Judge Smitherman, exposed through Will's songs and legally forced to recuse himself from any cases involving his relatives by blood or marriage, gained a well-deserved reputation as an unrelenting tyrant who kept the local population in fear for decades. But suddenly, the menacing wolves stopped frightening the local residents. The local county judge, a man who always made compromises, also received an opponent in the election, the well-known and beloved Tim Garza. Timbo has already secured the support of 2 local celebrities, and his band has recorded 3 different songs in support of him. 2 county commissioners up for re-election also had opponents outside the local government. And Sierra Garza, Tim's wife, announced she was running for tax collector against one of the Smitherman henchmen, who was widely suspected of favoritism and taxation and theft of public funds. Sierra's powerful promotional songs were reminiscent of Plutocracy and other similar songs from the first album. A major San Antonio-based credit union announced it will open a Cowtown branch in the renovated Agricultural Credit Union building on January 15th. Those forced to borrow from the local Smitherman family bank rejoiced at having a choice. And when the new FCU branch promised to refinance existing loans and offer low-interest loans and mortgages, many dissatisfied were preparing to switch banks. 2 days later, International Trade Logistics announced construction of a major distribution center just across the highway from Old Cowtown and began posting job openings. Paid work was offered at twice the local rate, ranging from training to management positions. The company also offered paid medical, dental, and vision insurance, as well as free daycare for employees. Ambitious employees with good work experience were promised training and career opportunities. For a couple of working parents, the benefits of working at Italy effectively doubled their income. Between the booming oil fields in Italy, Cowtown residents have never had such job opportunities before, and they filled out online applications in huge numbers. In a tight labor market, many low-wage, exploitative jobs will go empty, leading to the closure of some plants, and perhaps one or both of the Smitherman plants, unless they become more competitive in wages and benefits. Even if they do, most workers will seek new opportunities in an environment free of the disdainful attitudes toward employees that characterize the Smitherman's business. The plant, run by one of their offspring, seemed to be the main target of its advertising campaign. Around the same time, tax inspectors from the IRS took an interest in the tax returns of the plant and its manager. Donnie Ford broke out in a cold sweat, and like the rest of the light, Plutocracy was destroyed by his own arrogant actions. While the wheels of justice slowly turned, the BGH pundits rehearsed, played dance halls throughout South Central Texas, and recorded their 3rd album. Each song had already debuted at one concert or another, and the audience's reaction convinced them that this album would be the commercial breakthrough they had been working towards for so long. The final lyrics were a collaboration between Lila, Lena, and Will, with occasional contributions from Woody. The arrangements were a shared effort, with significant input from Gary and Danny, and the music videos in development largely reflected the vision of their technical team and manager. The band's musical talents did not necessarily mean that they understood their fans, and certainly did not help them understand computer graphics, images, animation, or anything else that was easily exploited by young people. The band members' varied backgrounds resulted in a diversity of genres that neither they nor their manager or producer could ever remember on a single album. Lila's folk roots, Lena's blues and bluegrass, Danny's southern rock, Gary's strange combination of 1950s and 1970s country rebels, Woody's red dirt country, and Will's Western storytelling style were all well represented across the 16 tracks. Soar was about as far away from their first concept album as you could get. Its versatility allowed musicians to showcase their talents on a wide variety of instruments, resulting in melodies that captured attention and made the listener stop and listen. The lyrics of each song were precise, powerful, and memorable. They were eagerly awaiting the early spring release of the BGH pundit Soar. The successes of their first album and Unfettered attracted attention, praise, and audiences, but after songs from Soar were featured at their concerts, rumors about the band spread like wildfire. The music industry is large and diverse, but also interconnected. What went on in the dance halls and concerts of Texas would not usually be of much interest to music moguls in Nashville and Los Angeles, but the fanatical enthusiasm of fans expressed on social media, at the box office, and in record and merchandise sales attracted their collective attention. When major labels start taking interest in a regional band on a ranch in McMullen County, it means they're really interested. Despite all the promises and interest, the pundits remained cool. They weren't sure they wanted or needed the oversight that comes with big contracts. If they signed, there would be no more concept albums, and they would not be free to explore the musical boundaries that ironically attracted the major labels to the Bush country in the first place. Based on the experience of Woody and many others, most labels would try to squeeze them into an existing formula for success, and they would have to make the music the way the label wants it. It didn't appeal to any of the band members, and for Woody it would have been Nightmare in Nashville Part 2. So he took particular pleasure in teasing his old label, and they fooled the big guys for a while before their manager revealed that in the modern digital age, the band didn't see enough benefit from such control and revenue sharing. They took risks to uncertain chances in the bushes instead of the certainty offered. Yes, their refusal of the proposed path could have made the band members rich and famous, maintaining this fortune for many years. On the other hand, if their new path fails, they could be left with a strong regional, perhaps national audience, and could make a living while continuing to create and perform the music they like. This path wasn't bad either. They each already had more money than they ever dreamed of, with even more coming, and they were having fun. While it took the justice system a long time to get to the bottom of William Andrew Callahan's lawsuits against his ex-wife and her new partner, it didn't take long to hear the restraining order case against Callahan himself. The judge overturned the injunction, chastised the original social worker and his supervisors for the poor quality of the investigation, suggesting it was premeditated, and invited the district attorney to review their actions. He also questioned the actions of the sheriff, the veracity of Mrs. Callahan, and Mr. Donald Bradley Smitherman in their affidavits, and the poor judgment of the judge, who at a minimum should have recused himself. All of these matters have been referred to the district attorney for investigation and possible prosecution. Judge Adams allowed Mrs. Callahan to retain primary custody and reside in the marital home until the divorce case was concluded. However, he gave Mr. Callahan liberal, non-supervised communication rights with the children, effective immediately, and ordered the parents to agree on a meeting schedule, or he would do it himself. The demoted Sarah, who greeted Will in San Juan at the door on Friday with her parents, bore little resemblance to the arrogant woman who had filed false charges against him and laughed at his suffering. Her ashamed parents also appeared remorseful, and he was welcomed into his own home as if he were an important stranger. Will looked around the living room and dining room with a frown and angry eyes. "He's not here," Sarah said quietly. "I wouldn't do that to you." He quickly turned, looked at his wife, and putting on the most sarcastic look and voice, replied, "Of course I wouldn't." She turned pale, her parents blushed, and Will asked roughly, "Where are my children? Andrew, Sarah Lynn, come downstairs." "I have a surprise for you," Sarah called loudly. Their bedroom doors opened, and his beautiful children appeared. They had not seen each other for 15 months, and they had grown so much that his heart ached even more. He realized that he had completely missed a critical stage in their maturation. Andrew was 9 years old. Sarah Lynn was 7. Due to the time frame of the restraining order, he missed 2 of their birthdays and 2 Christmases. Andrew was tall for his age with broad shoulders, sandy hair, and green eyes. He was the spitting image of his father. Sarah Lynn was smaller, with dark hair like her mother, but with Will's green eyes. Will's heart swelled with pride when he saw their green eyes light up. Their faces lit up with surprised smiles, and how they screamed with delight when they saw their dad. He leaned down as they ran up the stairs, and they ran into his open arms. Without words or tears, they hugged each other, and the children kissed his cheeks as often as he kissed theirs. Finally, Sarah Lynn took his face in her small hands and screamed with great excitement, "Dad, we missed you so much. We wanted to call you and go to you, but no one would let us. Mom said that you just left us, but our friends said that the law did not allow you to communicate with us or come to us. Why, Dad? Why did you leave us?" Will's eyes turned to his wife and her parents, but before he could respond in anger, Sanjuana intervened. "Honey, your dad wanted to see you, but the law made a mistake. They thought he was being mean to, so they said that he cannot see you or talk to you. But after I told the new judge what you and not Andrew told me, he corrected the mistake and said that now it's okay to see your dad again." Sarah Lynn looked at her with a puzzled expression and replied, "But we told the other lady, Mom's cousin Clara, the same thing we told you. Daddy never hit us or hurt us. He played with us, read to us, and helped us with studies. He is the best dad in the world. He never even raised his voice at us unless we were very, very bad. 9-year-olds understand more than 7-year-olds, and Andrew glared at his mother and grandparents. I don't think that's the whole truth. Miss Ortiz, the kids at school, said that everyone in town knew that Mom lied about Dad beating us, and Grandma and Grandpa told the sheriff that it was true. I don't know why they lied about Dad hitting us, and then lied again about Mom's boyfriend didn't hurt us. But my friends say their lies are why Dad couldn't be with us for so long, and I believe them." Will stood up and looked at his wife and her parents. "Did Donnie hurt my children?" he asked in an icy voice. "Did you two lie and say he didn't do it?" Father-in-law rushed to speak. "That's not entirely true, Andrew. Grandma and I said, we didn't see Donnie hurt you or yell at you or your sister. We said you and Sarah Lynn complained to us that he did." Will stepped towards his wife. Sanjuana grabbed his hand and said, "Will, don't," in the most menacing voice ever heard in this room. Will said, "You, my loving wife and mother of my children, are lying by claiming that I hit and screamed at the children I love and adore when you know full well that it didn't happen. And now you're lying when you say Donnie didn't hurt them when you know he did. I'll make sure the whole world knows this story, and I'll add to my lawsuit to get you and those two banned from having contact with children. And as for Donald Bradley, tell him I'm looking for him and when I find him." "That's enough, Will. Don't say another word," ordered Sanjuana Ortiz. "You're too angry right now. Take the kids and go back to the ranch. You shouldn't be making decisions or saying anything when the Irish temper is getting out of hand. Just go. Your friends are waiting in the car. I'll get their suitcases and follow you to the ranch." With one last angry glare at the Parkers, Will picked up the children as if they were still small and carried them to the stationary van. He introduced them to Gary, the driver, Danny, Lena, and Leela before gesturing to Woody and asking, "Do you remember that old highwayman?" Woody smiled at them, winked, and exclaimed, "Of course they remember their favorite uncle. Uncle Woody. Come here, you too. I missed you." Andrew smiled and stepped towards him. But Sarah then screamed Uncle Woody and jumped onto his lap. He hugged her and started rocking back and forth, purring "Jurr," and she giggled and started squirming with happiness. After he released her and sat her down next to him, he extended his hand towards Andrew. "Come here, big boy. Just because you're big doesn't mean you can't hug your favorite uncle." Woody cuddled Andrew the same way he did Sarah Lynn and made him laugh and smile. When he released the boy, he leaned back in the seat next to Lena, who immediately began a conversation with him, and Lila, who was sitting sideways in the front seat. The young women had recently stopped being babysitters, and they were showing men what an age-appropriate conversation with a 9-year-old boy and a 7-year-old girl sounded like. Everyone quickly determined what level of development Sarah Lynn and Andrew were at, and soon the whole group in the van was having an exciting conversation. The 50-mile drive along rural roads passed quickly. Sanjuana stayed only briefly to deliver luggage and ensure that the living quarters were adequate. Before he left, Will told her, "Sanjuanas, I need to thank you and apologize for my outburst. My patience was greatly tested by my ex-wife and Donnie Smitherman, and what Andrew said sent me into deep darkness. Now I have control over myself again, and will refrain from such conversations with her in the future." Your temperament is legendary, Will. I'd say you did pretty well considering the provocation, but don't go at Donnie with your fists that could lead to big problems, even without his relatives running the show. A wise person might consider getting a restraining order against Donnie based on what Andrew and Sarah Lynn claim. It would achieve several goals, including keeping their lovers separated while Sarah has custody of the children. Think about it. She winked before getting into the car and heading home. The kids loved the huge ranch house overlooking the river and wanted to ride the Addy V's next to it. Woody just said, "Let's go," and they immediately jumped on them for the big excursion. Andrew spoke as they turned off the engines on a hill overlooking the Frio River. "I love this place. We've always lived in the city, but some of my best friends live on ranches like this, and I've spent weekends with them. Sarah Lynn, too, were friends with Thomas and Angela, so sometimes we stay at the Alexander Ranch when Mom and Brad are out of town." "Brad, right? He told you to call him that, ass Will." "At first, no. He wanted us to call him Daddy, but we said we wouldn't because we already had a daddy," Andrew said defiantly. Then he said to call him Uncle Brad, and I told him he's not our uncle. He got angry and yelled a lot, but then he just said to call him Brad. "So it's Brad again," Woody chuckled. Apparently Donnie wasn't noble enough. Will snorted, which caught the attention of Leela, who took the children inside for a snack while they waited for the guests to arrive. "I'm for hamburgers," Will announced, before lighting a fire using the mesquite wood he had cooked in the barbecue pit yesterday. "You are in charge of everything else." By the time the wood burned down and turned into coals for cooking, the guests began to arrive. In addition to the 12 regular members and their children, the guests included 3 couples with children who were close friends of Sarah Lynn and Bach Andrew, including the Alexanders. Sierra suggested that we'll invite them, and his children's happiness confirmed that it was the right decision. Although they were new to ranch parties, all 3 couples were acquaintances from Cootown High, where Will and Woody attended. They were glad to be invited and easily joined the company along with the group members. The main course was grilled hamburgers or cheeseburgers, fried onions, and toasted buns with mayonnaise and mustard. Everyone had their choice of lettuce, tomatoes, sliced avocados, roasted jalapenos, or poblanos and pickles. Appetizers were tostadas with fresh salsa or guacamole, and dessert was chocolate chip cookies. Nothing fancy, just a tasty lunch for a nice autumn day in nature. Games were brought onto the field for adults and for children. They played horseshoes, cornhole, darts, frisbee, and drew chalk lines on the sidewalk and concrete for hopscotch and 4 squares. Will, Leela, and Leela watched and played with the children almost exclusively, giving the parents some well-deserved freedom for a few hours. By the time the sun touched the horizon, the party was over, goodbyes had been said, and the cool of the evening had driven the remaining guests back inside. Woody and Danny brought wood and started a fire in the fireplace, and everyone gathered around it while the kids roasted marshmallows, and Leela made Esmores for everyone. Soon Will's daughter climbed into his lap, head bowed and eyes sleepy, and he escorted her and Andrew to the bathrooms. Andrew quickly showered and got into bed, and Leela convinced Sarah Lynn to take a bubble bath with her before tucking her into bed. To avoid giving Sarah anything to attack in the upcoming custody battle, Will and Leela slept separately that night for the first time in a long time. It was unpleasant, but Sarah Lynn's early morning dash to Dad's room proved it was the right decision. By the time the waffle iron had finished baking its last waffles, a 3rd pan of bacon was frying, and 16 scrambled eggs had been neatly folded into a bowl. The children were waiting impatiently, and the adults were sipping coffee. A brand new 4-door pickup truck with a protective grill pulled up in the driveway. The doors slammed, Will's parents came in, and the children's hunger instantly dissipated. "Grandma, Grandpa," the granddaughter shouted, taken up by her grandson's exclamations. They spent the next few minutes cuddling and talking happily before Will told them that breakfast was getting cold. The children insisted that their grandparents sit with them, and they forgot about everything else while they ate and talked. 6 smiling faces were pleased with how joyfully grandparents and grandchildren met after more than a year of separation. Will's parents were serious Episcopalians, The band members came from different branches of Christianity, 2 Catholics, a Methodist, a Baptist, an agnostic, and Will himself, who was once a parishioner of the Episcopal Church. They hadn't been to church or worship since the group's inception, but that changed at 10:30 a.m. When Will's mother opened the canvas bag she'd brought with her, pulled out a Bible and another book, and handed the bag to her father. Some of them might refuse if they had a choice. But when she opened the Book of Common Prayer and announced that they were now going to have their morning prayer meeting, they simply waited for her to begin. The father handed out 5 more books, told everyone to share, and turned to page 11. He asked who wanted to read the first Bible verse and assigned the task to Andrew, then assured Sarah-Lynn that she would be next. And so they began. The short service inspired Leela and Lena so much that they took out their guitars and performed several old gospel songs and modern praise songs. The others sang along with those they knew, and everyone was impressed that these 2 young women knew the words and tunes to so many worship songs. The games from yesterday were still set up, and the kids wanted to practice to win next time. Everyone headed outside to play in the warm sunshine and cool breeze. Will, Grandpa, Leela, and Lena were playing with the 2 children. Grandfather and the other men competed in their games, and everyone had fun. An hour later, another pickup truck pulled up and parked. Will frowned and stepped in that direction. His mother grabbed his hand and said, "No, son, we invited them. We know you're mad at them, but you don't know the whole story. Let them tell their story. We'll tell you what we know, and then you decide what to do." Turning to Lila, she asked, "Could you entertain the kids a little longer? We'll need to talk to his parents, and we need to be there." "I would be honored, Mrs. Callahan," Lila answered sincerely before going back to playing hopscotch with the giggling children. Before starting, Lena gave Will a questioning look, to which he responded with a shrug. Inside, Will let everyone take their seats and then sat down in the chair across from his grandparents. "Will, I know you probably hate us, but we had no choice but to put your precious children first." Peggy began. We'll listen quietly as Peggy and Al talked about the challenges they faced and explained their decisions. When they finished, we'll look at his parents coldly. "Did you have anything to add, Mom?" Beatrice knew her son. She knew he was touched but not satisfied, and she knew they had to convince him for the sake of his children. "Will, everything Al and Peggy said is true. You may remember that at first they took your side, but when Sarah cut off both grandparents' ability to communicate with our grandchildren, the 4 of us met and agreed that they would have to obey. Otherwise, the children will be left at the mercy of their angry mother and the Smithermans, whom Sarah-Lynn and Andrew despise. So, we made a deal. They would stop defending you and pretending to take their daughter's side, but they wouldn't say they'd ever seen you hurt your kids or berate them." By then, Sarah and Donnie had started going away for the weekend and leaving the kids with teenage babysitters. We were all terrified of what might happen to them, so Peggy and Al offered to look after the kids when Sarah and Donnie went away. They usually left the children with Peggy and Al when they were gone overnight or for a few days, but hired nannies for their day-to-day commitments to society and politics. There were several months when they were gone, almost every weekend and several nights a week. And when they returned home drunk, they went to their room and did not pay any attention to the children. We met and discussed our options, including the Parkers filing a custody suit for neglect, and then your songs began to be played on radio stations, CMT, and media outlets such as YouTube. It quickly became a topic of discussion, and people began not only avoiding talking to Sarah, but also making fun of her. These songs unsettled her because she believed that everyone thought that they were about her and Donnie like the other songs. That's when they stopped going out as often and stopped going out on weekends altogether. Donnie was so angry at you that he sparked with anger, and Sarah hid from people because of what they said about her and what they told her when she went into town, even to the grocery store. I know it's ironic that she's hiding from what she accused you of, and Peggy and Al will tell you that she now understands what it's like to be falsely accused. Since their mother was now with them full time, we agreed that the children were safe. So we abandoned the custody suit and decided to wait to see what you would do. When the trials began, it became obvious that you were not going to spare anyone. And we met again and discussed how Peggy and Al could continue to care for the children, and at the same time explain to you why they did what they did. It's not optimal, but we're trying to cover more than a year ago in less than an hour, his mother said with a sigh. What else do you need to know? Will's expression didn't change while Parker or his mother were talking, and he remained impassive. He looked carefully at each of them in turn, ending with a glance at Eli. So you demoted me, and you two stood by silently while my reputation as a husband and father was destroyed, but you did it for the sake of the children. I'm not sure I understand how that works. No, Al, I don't want an answer. Yet let me continue. After all, I don't want an answer to every question I ask until the very end. Then I'll stop and give you a chance to answer. You always said you cared about me, but how long did you know your daughter was cheating on me? Before I caught her. It's hard to see you as caring friends when you let me be a cuckold for months without saying a word. In all this time since the restraining order, not one of you has contacted me. If you cared about me, why didn't you do this? You knew that I was going crazy with worry for my children. And finally, why didn't you let my parents see their grandchildren? You could have brought them while Sarah and Donnie were out of town, or walking around town. After all, they loved them too. Al looked at the others and then fixed his gaze on Will. The simple answer to all but the first question is Donnie and Donald. They came to us one evening after we told Sarah off for being away so much and told us how things were and what was coming next. They said we were being watched, that our phones were bugged, our house was bugged, our cars were bugged, and they knew what we were doing before we did it. Donnie warned us, and also Sarah Lynn and Andrew. Bad things will happen if we don't stay out of their business, or if we talk to you or your parents again. Your parents and I met several times after that in Laredo and San Antonio, but all four of us were horrified by their threats against Sarah Lynn and Andrew. I'm sorry for the demotion. This was my first chance to stand up and tell Sarah and Donnie to go to hell, and I gave up Will. But I promise we didn't know anything about her cheating until you made it public and posted Donnie to the hospital, and me in jail. I knew the odds were against me, but I did it anyway and got him a restraining order myself. Will replied. It was stupid, even if it felt good at the time. But why didn't anyone support me when she made false and slanderous accusations that I beat my wife and children? You and everyone else in town knew that I would. Never. I won't do this. That's when we made the deal. Son B interjected. We needed someone to take care of the kids. Donnie or his family certainly weren't going to do that, and Sarah was completely under his influence by then. She said and did whatever he told her to do, even if it was ridiculous or bad for you. Al and Peggy were worried, but we knew you would want someone to take care of your precious children. And that was the price. Well, take my word for it, no one believes this. Nonsense, exclaimed his father. From the very beginning, people came to me and said that they knew it was all a lie. But everyone was afraid to speak out. If the Parkers had joined the Smithermans, as it seemed, speaking out could lead to the loss of their jobs, or even worse. But your songs have changed people in this community, Will. All of us, really, Peggy exclaimed. It was as if someone shined a spotlight so bright that it destroyed the darkness, and we all saw the Smithermans and their henchmen for what they were, cockroaches, and not big bad wolves who devoured their enemies. Now that they've been exposed and other employers and the SNL are coming into town, it seems like the fear is gone, Al added. This is why every member of the ruling cabal now has an opponent and why these opponents will win the elections. Will snorted, then grinned. So the pen really is mightier than the sword, at least when the swordsmen are cockroaches, right? Okay, let's get to the point. Your little four convinced me. I think. I may have questions later, but I'm going to let go of my anger towards you. I would say I forgive you, but I guess forgiving there is nothing special. You did what you thought was right for your grandchildren, my children, and I do not want to deprive them of your wisdom and love. So from my side now, everything is fine, but I have a big request. I will do my best to be here with the children, but I have obligations to the group that will take me away from time to time. I hope that the four of you, or at least two of you, can travel with us on weekends when I have custody of the children and I have a concert. That way, when I'm on stage, you can take care of Andrew and Sarah Lynn and perhaps from time to enjoy our music." The grandparents looked at each other and nodded at each other. And he added to test this decision, "Our next 2 shows are scheduled for weekends when I don't have custody, but we're performing at the Arneson Theater in San Antonio on New Year's Eve. When I have custody of the children, I'll get you a suite or 2 if you want, because I want you to come with us and look after Andrew and Sarah Lynn. If possible, I'd like you to be there by mid-afternoon, have lunch with us, take the kids to the concert from 8 to 10, and then join us on the barge for a ride on the river. If they can stay awake, we'll see everything, fireworks at midnight, and celebrate what I hope will be a much better year." While they conferred and planned, we'll follow Lila. "Lila, can you and the guys play with them for another 10 to 15 minutes? It's time for my girlfriend to meet her grandparents." Lila's eyes widened and she looked at herself. She was wearing Wrangler jeans and a light blue hoodie with brightly colored athletic shoes. Her hair was pulled back into a messy ponytail, and after playing with the children, she had almost no light makeup left on, which she put on early in the morning. "Well, I don't think now's the right time." He took her hand, winked, and said, "You look great, the kids love you, and they will love you. Let's go." She was reluctant at first, but convinced by Will's words and assured by Lila that she looked perfect and everything would be fine, she stopped, collected herself, and cleaned herself up, and then went in first while we held the door. Having adopted her stage persona, Lila smiled, her posture was straight, and her mood was friendly. The grandparents stood in a circle and talked until Lila and Will stopped about 10 feet away from them. They turned to them, Will smiled and said, "I want to introduce you to this wonderful girl. This is my bandmate, Lila Rebecca Tate. Lila, this is Peggy Parker, and this is Al Parker. Parker is Andrew's grandparents, and Sarah Lynn is Sarah's parents. You already met my parents, but I did not meet your acquaintance." Then, Will wrapped his left arm around her waist before continuing. "Now, I'm sure you've seen and heard Lila perform at our shows and heard her amazing voice on our songs. But what didn't you know? She's also my girlfriend." The smiles on the men's faces became wider, but on the women's they instantly changed to restrained smiles that barely hid curiosity and concern. After handshakes and personal introductions, Bea and Peggy dragged Lila into the kitchen for coffee and conversation. We'll let the men outside introduce Al, and then after warning Lila to check on Lila, he took it upon himself to play with the children. Lila went into the house, and the grandfathers joined Will. "Andrew, Sarah Lynn, I want you to know that I talked to your grandparents, and now I understand why they acted the way they did. I love them, and I know you love them. So we'll be hanging out often, time together." Sarah Lynn smiled and ran to her grandfather. Andrew looked skeptical, but softened when Will whispered to him, "I'll tell you about it later," and motioned for him to go to his grandfather. The grandpas took over play duties, while Will returned to make sure his girlfriend was okay. He saw through the kitchen window that the girls were laughing and chatting with their grandmothers, and he let out a sigh of relief before returning to his bandmates. They played guitars, tapped on the table, and worked on a couple of new songs that were missing something. They stopped when he approached. "There's no blood on you," Woody commented. "Can we assume that everything is going well?" "You can," Will replied before picking up his guitar and joining the group. An hour later, Lila returned, hugging his mother, both smiling. Lila led Peggy, Al, and Dad outside. "Where are Andrew and Sarah Lynn?" asked Will. "They watch Disney on a huge TV with 1,000 channels," Dad answered. "Who owns this house?" asked Al. "And whose mark is this W on the gate?" "This was my Uncle Talbot's ranch until recently. His health is failing, and Aunt Minnie is in a nursing home in Pleasanton, so he needs to be close to her and his doctors. He had a hard time coming here to take care of business, so he sold it to me," Woody replied. "Forgot to tell us about this until now, buddy," Will asked with a smile. "Nothing special. I hired a local couple to take care of the cattle and house, so owning a ranch won't interfere with our music." "Well, now that you've started putting down roots, I need to share my news. Remember Vincent's crossing on the Nooses River? The rich bastard who bought it from my great aunt started spending the family money and decided to get rich quickly in cryptocurrency. It didn't work out, and it seems he has some unpleasant creditors. They lost patience around the same time. I made him an offer of 50 cents on the dollar in cash, and he accepted. I haven't been there since Aunt May inherited it from Grandpa's estate 13 years ago. I bought it without seeing and paid a really stupid amount of money, even if it was half the asking price. I could have bought something. It's like a black hole for money. My realtor, Tina Welch, insists he has improved the roads and fences and built what she calls a fantastic house with guest houses, but admits she hasn't been there in years. She wasn't even allowed to tour it while it was in panic mode, asking if she had a buyer who could pay cash immediately. She called me, knowing that I might be interested because the ranch was my great-grandfather's family homestead, and that I might have the money to buy it quickly. I told her I was interested, but not at that price. She asked for a offer, so I offered half, saying that's all I can afford. She laughed at my offer, but he didn't. Apparently his life was more important to him than the ranch. Woody remembers this place, but the rest of you have never seen it, except when you looked west in the dark from Billy Goat Hill, which is 2 miles away. The Nueces River runs through the middle of the property. And the old county line. The road is now private and has a steel bridge with a wooden deck that spans the river. This bridge must have been built in the 1800s. We used to swim in the river and have picnics with the girls under the oak trees. Tina says all the old wooden buildings my folks built have been torn down except one, and the new buildings are on a brushy hill overlooking the river to the northwest where we hunted rattlesnakes. The owner has to pick up everything Rick wants to keep by 3 o'clock this afternoon, so I won't be able to come to rehearsal today. I really want to see what this place is like, so I can decide whether I want to keep it or sell it. I plan to be at the gate at 3 o'clock. Do any of you want to come with me? Leland knew about his secret purchase, but the others joked at his expense that he was keeping it a secret before declaring that they wanted to go and have a look too. Will's father had tears in his eyes, happy to see the historic ranch return to the family, and gave Will a big hug, patting him on the back. Glad that you two are using this easy money to buy something solid. Apparently what they say is true. You can take the boys out of the village, but you can't take the village out of the boys. Leland and the kids rode in Will's pickup, and their bandmates rode in Woody's. The grandparents got into the Parkers' SUV, leaving the Callahan's car in the school parking lot. Tina met him there. She was another high school friend and was literally jumping for joy that the old Callahan ranch was Callahan's again. She handed him the keys, remotes, and a USB drive with access codes, including codes for the security system and door panels, and then begged him to go with them. I haven't been there since he had a Christmas party 5 years ago. He did a few more parties after that, but Thad and I weren't important enough to be invited. I really want to see it again, but I'll tell you what, when I was there, the place looked gorgeous. I don't know how it is now, and the fact that he wouldn't even let me come look makes me worried, but I'm sure it's worth at least that much. How much will paid? Tina climbed into Woody's pickup truck and regaled its passengers with tales of the old ranch along the short 10-minute drive. At the entrance, there was a large, ornate steel gate. They were controlled by remotes with a keypad next to the driver's window for guests. The road was paved with limestone on a thick caliche base. It needed bedding, but the canvas was raised more than a foot above the black soil, which they knew turned to sticky mud when it got wet. Tina took charge as soon as they pulled into the ranch, and Woody went first. She called Will on his cell phone, which he had connected to it via Bluetooth, so everyone in his car could hear her descriptions of the views they passed. Will and Leela had seen an aerial photograph, but from the ground it looked completely different. They drove slowly past the main house, 2 guest houses, and a playroom, all clustered around a central park with grass, trees, and a swimming pool. The concrete pad around the pool, they estimated, extended 20 feet in all directions. Metal tables with umbrellas and soft chairs were scattered throughout the area, interspersed with soft loungers. The whole place looked like it belonged in an upscale Dallas neighborhood, rather than a ranch in the bush. At Tina's direction, they drove several hundred feet up the hill behind the guest houses to a metal building that they estimated was about 15,000 square feet. It was closed on the side facing the houses with windows, doors, a sidewalk, and a fenced yard. On the southwestern half of the opposite side, there were covered stalls for horses. And on the northwestern half, there were 3 compartments for equipment. A 30-foot concrete walkway with roll-up gates on either side separated the stalls from the enclosed portion of the building. About 2/3 of the barn-dominium was living space. 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom in the back, with an open kitchen, dining, living room occupying the front. Upon further inspection, it was revealed that the last third of the enclosed space had previously served as a saddle room, but the saddles, ropes, reins, and other equipment had been removed. In the back corner was a 10 by 12-foot office near the door from the alley. It was empty too. Furniture and appliances had not been removed from the living area of the barn-dominium, and 3 appliance bays were full. The first bay contained a 90-horsepower New Holland tractor with a front loader and shredder. Behind the chopper were a plow, a disc cultivator, and a baler. The second compartment contained 3 Kawasaki Mule all-terrain vehicles with 2 seats. The third contained an old but classy motorhome with a Caterpillar diesel engine in the back. At first, they chatted happily, finding more and more evidence that was fears were unfounded. But after examining the barn and its contents, the walk back to the main house was quiet and thoughtful. Will was stunned by how lucky he was, and the rest were waiting for a catch. Such luck simply does not happen. When he entered the code to open the main door of the house, they were shocked. The house alone was worth the money. Will paid for the whole place. They entered the great room, a huge room so large that there were 3 different sets of sofas and armchairs facing 386-inch televisions and laptops in cozy corners. A long wooden table with 20 chairs dominated the dining area, separated by a granite breakfast bar. From a modern kitchen with black granite and stainless steel surfaces and professional appliances, and a freezer. Now they were in complete shock, and Tina was enjoying their disbelief. She poked Woody in the side and said, "I told you so." "No, I didn't," he objected. "This is much more impressive than what you described." Leela snuggled up to Will and said quietly, "I agree with Woody. You said it was a ranch with a nice house and guest quarters, but this is a mansion with a pool and guest houses. I had no idea." Will answered, stunned, for the first time following my intuition rather than my reason brought me luck. "There's a first time for everything," Woody and Tina exclaimed in one voice. They spent the rest of the day touring the 6-bedroom, 7-bath house and guest cabins, trying out billiards, foosball and shuffleboard in the game room, and riding ATVs on the improved pasture roads. They were surprised to discover that the previous owner had left all the furniture in the house and guest houses, including bed linen and kitchen utensils. The previous owner neglected the Noose's River Valley, which was overgrown with brush and littered with debris from floods. Everything else, including the hunting lodges, was well maintained. The children and grandparents began to get hungry, so after saying goodbye, the elders took the children to dinner and then returned them to Sarah's house. A few cold beers from Woody's ice chest later, the pundits began to philosophize. Karma, that's what it's called, or maybe fate, Woody suggested with a thoughtful expression on his face. After being cheated on over and over again, the gods intervened, and my friend Will finally started to get lucky. First, he wrote a few hits. Then he got a job in a cool new band and got a gorgeous girl. Then his song started making money, and now he stumbled upon a deal that will make his money-hungry ex-wife blind with envy. Will, that reminds me, what are you planning to do with the saddle room in the barn? Asked Gary. I hope you have the same thoughts as me, Gar. Lena intervened, and I hope will doze too. Gary, Lena, I thought this room would make a great recording studio and rehearsal space. What were you thinking? Great minds think alike, my suddenly lucky friend. Yes, Lena, Gary agreed. Excellent minds, Layla snorted. I don't think any of us left that room without imagining the same thing. I'm guessing when you looked at the guest houses, you thought of neighbors. Actually, Gary and I looked at a barn-dominium and thought it would be a great place for traveling musicians, Danny replied. Lena smiled. Actually, I thought the pool house would be perfect for your favorite roommate. Not wanting to be left out, Woody added, "I'm the perfect house guest for the playroom. You won't even hear me bring my friends here for parties. But, we still have to drive back to Austin to record. And when the tour starts, the nearest airport is 100 miles away." "That's right, but my kids are less than 5 miles away," Will replied. "The interstate is just a few miles over that hill, and the city has a very nice airport with a runway suitable for corporate jets if we ever get big enough that it will matter. Laredo is about an hour south, Corpus Christi is 90 minutes east, San Antonio is about 90 minutes north, and Austin is an hour further, assuming there's no traffic on I-35. Finally, Garner Park and Concan are less than 2 hours to the northwest. Smitherman's little scenery is falling apart thanks to a riot, and this place can be a great place to live again. And if my lawyers are right about the monetary compensation I should get, those donkeys who ran me out of town will give me back my family's ranch. What do you say? Do we take our things from Austin and settle down here, or do we move back and forth?" Gary spoke first. "Well, it's not bluegrass or West Tennessee or Appalachian, but the place is really catchy. I'm not a city guy, so I vote for a complete move if I get a northern bedroom in a barn dominium." Everyone unanimously agreed if everyone would get their desired room, and so the pundits moved to a ranch less than a mile from Billy Goat Hill. The next morning at 8 o'clock, Will's phone rang. Luckily, Leela had allowed him 4 or 5 hours of sleep, and his holiday hangover had been fairly mild, so he was fully functional when the detectives gave him their verbal report. By the time they finished, he had already drunk 2 cups of strong, if bitter, coffee and was ready to act. He made his next call to Lawyer Savage, who had already received an electronic copy of the report and was ready to file new claims. Will gave him free rein, smiling at the thought of the consequences. As much as they had hurt him, what awaited them would be much worse, and he was going to enjoy their suffering as much as they enjoyed his. Sitting back, enjoying the fruits of his revenge, Will began to compose a new song in his head. He grabbed his tablet and guitar and within 15 minutes come up and Swiss ready. Will left the office to find that Woody had gone into town to get some breakfast tacos, milk, good coffee, and supplies for a couple of lunches. Everyone else had already eaten, so he grabbed a taco, talking between bites about the contents of the report. Their laughter and comments softened the situation slightly, but the betrayal was so methodical, unprincipled, ruthless, and corrupt that it seemed that the songs with which he brought down his enemies were not strong enough. The band was ready to sit down and write another concept album to expose the depth of their machinations, but Will suggested a different approach. Celebrate their downfall. He played and sang Comeuppance. The gloomy mood was broken, and new ideas for the 4th album appeared. By Friday, the contents of the Austin garage had been moved to the tuck room. Their clothes and belongings were in place, rented furniture had been removed from the apartments, and fines for breaking leases had been paid. Workers led by Lena and Leela installed sound lock, absorbing panels in the room, while the others were in Austin. Barry wasn't too happy with their decision, but accepted the promise that they wouldn't miss any of the scheduled dates and would keep him updated. He, his new girlfriend, and their entire technical team were invited to the Pachanga to celebrate the success of their first 2 albums and the income they generated. Also on Friday, Donald Bradley Smitherman was served with a restraining order banning him from coming within 500 feet of Andrew and Sarah Lynn, and he reportedly became enraged. The things he said and the threats he made to the deputy who served him the papers led to his arrest. Raul Medina was not one of the deputies under the Smitherman's control. His chest camera was on, and he seemed to enjoy apprehending and handcuffing the arrogant and aggressive brat. The sheriff at that time was somewhere in Montana hunting, without access to communications, and therefore could not intervene. The processing process was long and humiliating, but it was the closing of the cell door that hurt Donnie the most. Donnie screamed and raged, but couldn't do anything until his hearing the next day, so he had to spend the night in the same prison where Will had previously been imprisoned after beating him. Sitting there, listening to the glares and threats from the prisoners in the neighboring cells, Donnie felt small, helpless, and scared for the first time in his privileged life. When morning came, his confidence returned. Daddy would sort it out. No one would dare treat Smitherman like that. His father did bail him out on $250,000, but they learned that the charges could send Donnie to prison for several years. For hooliganism, threatening a police officer and resisting arrest, he faced 3 years in prison. The father was not happy with his son's behavior, but he was even more angry at how the cops and the judge treated his son. Who do these people think they are? He asked himself. They don't know who we are. The Smithermans own this city. This county I will crush them all, he promised. 3 hours later, fueled by his father's anger and half a bottle of Crown Royal, Donnie decided to prove that the authorities' threats were an empty formality. The court order is not a decree for him. He will go to Will's house, have sex with his wife, beat his children, and show everyone who is boss. And if Will tries to stop him, a .45 in his belt will quickly solve the problem. He barely noticed the car parked at the end of the street. But as he pulled into Sarah's driveway and got out of the car, a Tahoe marked Coke, County Sheriff rushed toward him with its red, white, and blue lights flashing. Sir, return to your vehicle and leave the area immediately. You are violating a court order. A loud voice sounded from the police car. He raised his middle finger in the air, shouted, "Damn you all," and pulled out a pistol. He started waving his weapon around, shouting threats, demanding that the cops get out of his damn yard. They called for reinforcements and took up positions behind their vehicle. Throw your weapons on the ground and lie on your stomach. We mean no harm to you, but you must follow my orders immediately, the officer shouted. No one will ever know what was going through his enraged mind when he took the fighting stance he had been taught at the shooting range and opened fire on the police. At first, they did not respond, hoping that he would use up the ammo without harming anyone. But when a bullet struck the high post right next to Deputy Gibson's head, Officer Guerrero opened fire. He continued to curse and make threats. So police alerted arriving backup that the suspect was armed and had already opened fire. Sirens and lights announced the arrival of 2 more crews. The officers took positions behind their vehicles until Deputy Gibson gave the order again. Throw your weapons aside and raise your hands. We don't want to cause you more harm, but if you shoot again, we won't have a choice. He weakly threw the gun aside, raised his hands, and shouted, "Don't shoot! I surrender! Help me!" It was Christmas morning. The 12-foot tree in the main house was surrounded by gifts. Many were for band members or grandparents, but most were for Will's children, who had already received 1 gift for each of the 12 days of Christmas. The grandmothers tried to chide him for spoiling the kids, but he reminded them that he hadn't been allowed to give them gifts for birthdays, Valentine's Day, Easter, graduation, or Christmas for over 15 months, so he was just making up for lost time. The grandmothers, together with Leela and Lena, prepared a Christmas feast which lasted for 2 meals that day. Woody's new girlfriend, Samantha Parker, spent most of the day next to him or on his lap, and they disappeared into his cabin in the middle of the day. She appeared again on December 16th. When the school holidays began, she was a primary school teacher, and they immediately resumed their relationship. Now they were inseparable, and she applied for a job in the Pleasanton School District near Woody Ranch for the next school year. Sarah spent Christmas morning and afternoon alone, crying and remembering the good times, before she allowed money and power to seduce her. She celebrated with the kids and parents last night, but today they were all with Will. Her Will, the same Will whom she loved since childhood, but whom she betrayed for Donnie. What has she done? And she cried again. Even though he was handcuffed to a hospital bed in San Antonio, Donnie also received 2 gifts for Christmas, a new shoulder and a new hip. Oh, he didn't get them inserted on Christmas Day itself, but shoulder surgery was scheduled for the 27th, and that was the closest thing to a gift he'd get this year. A hip replacement was scheduled for months later after a long period of physical therapy for his shoulder. That was fine with him because it meant he wouldn't be in jail while he was in the hospital. He knew that after the trial, he would spend a lot of time in a prison cell. If only he hadn't gone after Sarah to spite Will. The Billy Goat Hill pundits played to a sold-out crowd on the banks of the San Antonio River, and a local ABC station broadcast their performance live as part of its New Year's Eve coverage. The crowd was in awe all night, But the only thing that received more applause than Will's triumphant song come up in was when he lifted Leela from her keyboard, sat her on a suddenly appeared chair in the middle of the stage, got down on one knee and proposed to her. It blew the minds of the crowd along the river, and many South Texas homes watching the broadcast. She said yes, of course, and then he sang her a love song that he had written especially for her. And so the legend and history of BGH pundits became even more famous as the new year began. The pachanga they held for their friends and fans at the Super Bowl on Sunday only added to their legend because it took place on top of Billy Goat Hill. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you. And go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one. Click to the next one, click to the next one, click to the next one.